Hi everyone. In this presentation I'll give a quick overview of some of my favourite projects that I've worked on both as an independent curator and also with other organisations. My work in curating takes place and responds to the built environment and facilitates speculative architectural proposals. So in this case, I do want to acknowledge that this land was never ceded and always will be and always was Aboriginal land, especially when we look at these kinds of projects that take place within this built environment. So we might start the countdown to the first slide. So I'm starting this presentation with an image of a person creating an allotment garden in the ruins of a bombed crater, as I think it really encapsulates a lot of the ideas and themes that I try to explore in my work. It's informal architecture, it's a bottom-up approach to landscape design and to urban design. It's a creative use of space and very much a landscape in transition. It also shows the potency and potential of landscapes in crisis. It's apocalyptic and also utopian. This next slide is of the island of Lofoten in the Arctic Circle. I've included it because it actually really informed a lot of the work I did, and it was where my first curatorial, collective was formed. It was during an artist residency, and I formed a curatorial collective called Free Soil with some artists and researchers from all over the world, really. And it showed me, how inspiring it can be to work with people from different disciplines. So there were researchers, writers. Later on, I then went to establish the New Landscapes Institute. So as mentioned, it was a way for me to really create a platform where I could collaborate with architects, designers, and commission new work and projects outside of traditional institutions. It's also got a great logo designed by Heath Killen. So, once you get the logo, you basically, it's a real thing, right? I'll talk about some of the projects. So this was an early project I did called the Urban Wildlife Safari. It was a public program that took the form of a walk. It was part of a larger exhibition at the MCA, but I invited bird watchers and ecologists to talk about the spaces in between where wildlife was, thriving. So this was walking towards Barangaroo, which at that time was a wasteland. And as you can see, some of the wonderful buildings that have since been demolished. We were just talking about some of those great urban landscapes that are now gone. Another project called DIY Urbanism. This is one of my more participatory projects where it took place at the Tin Sheds Gallery, which is a great gallery who still accepts open proposals for architecture and design exhibitions. And the public were invited to add their ideas for urban interventions within the cityscape of Sydney. I've done other exhibitions at Tin Sheds, which looked at architecture. So I'm really interested in archives and inviting artists to respond in contemporary ways. This was an opportunity I had working with the New South Wales Government Architect Office, and had access to all their collections of photographs documenting the 100-year history of public works. So I managed to get a bit of funding together and invited some architects and artists to work with me on these collections. So this was one of the works that we ended up producing and commissioning. We found these images of these binny shells that had been built in the 70s in schools in Australia. It was this wonderful experimental form of architecture where it involved inflatables and concrete, and they were all being demolished. So Zanny Begg, the artist, made a great film about the binny shell where she interviewed the original architect and some of the students that were still using the binny shells as a library. So it was a great contemporary response to an older historical period. This is a shot of the installation. So it was an exhibition which combined historical material plus public programs and about 7 new commissions. That was at Gaffer Gallery. We also did a series of walks, and there was a catalogue, as well as some performances. So we worked with 6 artists on that. So another project also that was inspired by some historical, discoveries that I found accidentally. This was an 1888 map of the travelling stock routes of New South Wales. So these were used for droving. The red lines indicate where they are, and at the time they were still Crown land, so there were still, you know, common areas, public spaces that people could use. So once again, not knowing exactly where the exhibition or how it would take place or form, I invited some artists to do some field work with me. I was really interested in going out on site, going out onto the stock routes, creating some, you know, temporary architecture and prototypes. This is Future Methods Studio, you know, camped out on some of the stock routes that we could find and access, and did research around that. And that ended up also becoming a 3-year project that started in Wagga Wagga and travelled regionally with a group of artists doing different kinds of work. So this was another work that I commissioned. Part of the project we did audio interviews with communities that still use the stock routes, so bird watchers, beekeepers, graziers, knowledge holders, and I commissioned a young emerging architecture group called Grandeza to create this contemporary plant which could facilitate conversations and discussions both in the gallery and outside on the stock routes, and also be a listening station where you could listen to all the audio that we recorded. It's quite fast, 30 seconds. This project also took me overseas, so there's this amazing history of international nomadic pastoral routes. So I went to England and did some work with cooking sections, looking at the rights of way laws in England, and particularly the bridle paths, which was great because I got to combine my love of horse riding with trespassing and important, you know, political acts of commoning. And that was an installation on Baker Street. So up to my current and most recent project, which was part of the Sydney Biennale, I worked together looking at some architectural drawings of a dolphin embassy that was created by the group Ant Farm in the 1970s. And it was never built, so they came to Australia in the 70s, and all these amazing drawings. So I started off just speaking to some of the remaining members of Ant Farm and asking about this craft, and then thinking, wouldn't it be great to do a contemporary version, and wouldn't it be great to actually build a floating pontoon? And I got more interested in the history of their work in Sydney and found that there was a lady called Alexandra Morfett who was actually pretty much rewritten out of the history of the Ant Farm project. That was a model of their craft. I found her, she lives in eventually, through what somebody called forensic curating, but it was kind of like stalking. I found her, she's in Bowral, and she had all these amazing drawings as well that we ended up using for the exhibition. And I collaborated with a range of young designers and Ben Blakeborough in building a craft, but also exhibiting some of this material, and working with Ant Farm, and especially the archives that Alex had that were unseen and perhaps forgotten. And we worked on a pontoon and how we would build a floating pontoon. And what would that mean today? Would it actually necessarily, you know, be about communicating with dolphins, or should we perhaps be communicating with, I don't know, toxic oysters or mangroves? So one of the briefs in the pontoon was that it could facilitate conversations. So the furniture is designed by Mac Studio, and it's modular, so it can have a conversation or it can be moved to have an exhibition. And as you saw in the last image, it's built. Ben designed it and built it. It's currently at Newington, at the Armoury. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I thought that image. So that's what it looks like. And yeah, it's basically a mobile conversation, discussion boat, and the idea is that it's now will be an ongoing project. So I'm quite excited about being here tonight as well, and being able to talk about it and show the potential that it might have. It can't go on water that's too rough, so it needs to rivers and quiet waters. Outside of my independent curating, I also have actual jobs with actual organisations, because independent curating doesn't always pay the bills. So I did work with Sydney Living Museums, and one of my favourite projects with them was working on Sydney Open, where I got to find places that weren't normally open to the public, and then convince the owners or tenants to open them up to public tours. And this is an image of St James Underground Station, and just showing the potential of opening that up. And I'm currently working at the Opera House on the Build program, and that's really exciting because I get to curate programs for young people, a lot of them who've never been to the Opera House, and show them different perspectives and stories of the Opera House. So this is a group from Liverpool, and they get to do workshops around designing on country, and ended up deciding to flood the car park because, to bring back the tidal waters that was once there at the Opera House. And my final slide I've just left like this because I thought it was great that museums and galleries wanted tonight to be a networking event and for us all to discuss new ideas and pitch projects. So I'm looking forward to not having such a one-way conversation later, and maybe we can have a drink and talk about ideas or pitch ideas. I'm very open to new projects. I've just recovered from the last one. So yeah, open to new things. Thank you.